Okay. We have a very special guest for next talk. So this guy, he doesn't like duct tape. He doesn't like having to put stuff together so much. He was bothered by separate monitors, and he got a 55-inch screen. Like, what's he doing? Playing Euro Truck Simulator all day. He has a 55-inch screen, so everything is perfectly connected, and he's taking that same mentality to the backend to front-end debate with remote. Introducing Noam Honig. Woo!
So hi everyone, it's great to be here. I'm Noam, I'm from Israel, and I'm going to talk to you about the full stack development. Before I start, I just want to get a sense of the room. How many of you do full stack development? Okay, perfect. What do you use for the front end? How many use React? Okay, how many use Vue? Okay, Angular? What does everybody else use? Svelte? Svelte, of course. Okay, cool. And on the back end, how many of you use Node.js on the back end? Cool, perfect. Okay, so as I said, I'm Noam. I'm from Israel. I've done many things in my career. I've been a consultant. I've been a CEO of a company. But at the end of the day, I like coding. I spend any hour I can get developing code, and I really enjoy doing that. In the last 20 years, I've spent my career working on hundreds of enterprise application modernization. These kind of business applications have hundreds of tables and thousands of forms. They're a line of business applications, insurance, banking, CRMs, ERPs. It's the kind of day-to-day applications that any organization needs, and I feel that there's not enough innovation in that world. I'm lazy, really, really lazy. Okay, if I weren't lazy, I wouldn't get anywhere. I'm error-prone, which means I need tooling to protect me from myself, and I like to deploy things fast. Usually when I write an application, it will be live within a week and start rolling on from there. So the kind of business applications that I write are generally referred to as CRUD applications. And when we need to write a basic CRUD applications, these are the building blocks that all of us refer to. So we have a server. I'm going to use Node.js in this demo, and we have a front end. For this demo, I'll use React, but it really applies for everything. So we'll have model types on the front end and model types on the back end. We're going to have API routes on the back end and some code to consume it, some service on the front end to consume these APIs. You're going to need to have data validation on the API and front-end validation as well. You're going to need access control on the API and authorization rules on the front end. And ORM, paging, real-time routes, components, that's it. That's what you need to start writing a very basic business application. I think it's hell. There's way too many details to work with. And the way I look at it, these are all unwarranted separations of concerns. It's duplicate code, back-end and front-end, kind of socket and plug. And I really hate writing things multiple times, and since I'm error-prone, I usually get them wrong. So keeping it consistent when I'm changing the API on the backend and the front-end is somewhere that I always struggle with. Also, the data access, paging, sorting, filtering, real-time capabilities, it's a lot of repetitive boilerplate code. And I really, really, really hate boilerplate code, since it's copied with the errors, with the mistake, with the vulnerabilities. In recent time, modern full-stack frameworks such as TRPC, Next, SvelteKit, Remix, Redwood, whatever, started addressing this problem by sharing some types between the backend and the front-end and some server actions or API calls that make it a little bit easier, but I think it's just not enough. The way I look at it, all of these concerns are reflections of a business entity. It can be a customer, it can be a book, it can be an order. All of these are different views around that business entity. And I want it to be just one single source of truth and have everything else reflected from it. So with that idea, I started several years ago, created a bunch of projects, and ended up branding it Remalt, and created an open source library called Remalt, that I'm going to show it to you. So what we're going to do today, we're going to take a front-end React app and turn it into a full stack app with everything that I've written over here, try to do it in the 21 minutes that I have left, and maybe even have time to deploy it. Looks interesting? Cool. So to quote a great guy, let's go to the code. So we have here on the right this code. I'm using Vite here. How many of you use Vite? Okay, how many of you don't know what Vite is? Okay, so just a few words. Vite is a bundler for React, Vue, Svelte, or pretty much anything else. It also gives you a great development experience. So whenever you edit a file, it will hot reload the browser and reflect it immediately. So it makes life a lot of fun when you develop. So here I have an app that I'm using Vite to develop. It's a pretty standard React app. Let's review the code. So I have here a front-end state with the test that I'm going to show. And you can see the test over here. I have some code to add a new task that serves the form over here. I have some code to set tasks as completed and delete tasks that I can use to do this and do that. Of course, nothing is saved because it's front-end state. So I refresh, I go to the original state. And we have a function to set all completed that we can use here to set all completed. And lastly, some basic HTML. So we have the form, we have the tasks, and we have a button. Okay? Fairly simple React application. And let's go ahead and turn it into a full-stack application. So the first thing we need to do is actually create a backend. So I'm head over here, and I'm going to say backend. I'm going to create a file called backend, index.ts. I'm going to use Express. And let's do a demo, see that it works. Hello, OS day 24. Great. So we have a basic route here. Now, so far I've been using Vite to hot reload the front end, but I can also use Vite to hot reload the back end, which makes the same fun dev experience. So I'm going to head over to Vite config, and I'm going to import Express from a plugin, and I'll say Express backend, or source backend. And as soon as I do that, our API works. Okay? So we've got a backend, and we have something to start with. Now, back to our application. When we look at our code, everything uses the task type. Okay? That's pretty much our entity. We can see the task being used everywhere. So let's head over to the task. And the first thing I want to do is share it between the front end and the back end. So to do that, I'll add a folder called shared, and I'll drag and drop the task to it. Great. So I consider this my business entity. I think this is my single source of truth. Everything is a reflection of it, the database, the API, the front-end query language. And I just want to use this class to reflect all of those. And to do that, I'll give it a few decorators. And for starters, I'll allow all CRUD capabilities. Later, I'll restrict that. I'll tell it that the ID is a CUID, title is a string, completed is a Boolean, and created at is created at. Next, I'll add it to our API. So I'm going to do import remult express, and I'm going to say const API remult express. And in the entities array, I'm going to add our task. And lastly, I'll ask Express to use our API. So as soon as I do that, we'll get to see over here that I have API tasks. I have an API, a REST API that returns the tasks. Let's go ahead and explore it. So I can hit get and get an empty array. I can send post, give it a body, and it will post a request. It generated the ID based on my definition, and now we can see it in our array. So just a few decorators, a few lines of code, and I have a fully functional REST API. Let's go ahead and input a few tasks. So I'm lazy, so I'm going to hijack them from the front end. First of all, I'll delete them from here, and we can see that we no longer have them in our front end state. And I'll head over to our request and simply push them here. Great. So now we have all the tasks in our database. Now you might ask yourself at this point, what database? We haven't yet configured any database. And Remult can work with any database, but if you don't define anyone, it actually starts by creating a very basic JSON database that we can see over here. Great for development, great for visibility, and later in this demo, we're going to graduate to a grown-up database. Perfect. So we have our tasks, and now we want to use them in the front end. Here is our app tier 6. So I'm going to use the same task type that we used to define our API, the same class itself, and I'm going to use it now in the front end. I'm going to define a task repo, which is going to be a repo of type task. This returns a repository of type tasks that I'll be used to manage all my interaction with the task entity. I will use it to fetch, to insert, to delete, all of those. So let's go ahead and do that. Add a use effect, task repo, find, then set tasks. And as soon as I do that, I get the task from the backend to my frontend. Let's check out the network tab. There's really no black magic over here, just a simple REST API call that goes and gets the data. Now, getting all the data is nice, but not really useful. Every application needs more functionality to that. And when you look at this business application, you see the repetitive pattern. All of them need pretty much the same things. So anyone needs paging. So let's go ahead and limit to 2, maybe see page 2, page 3. We no longer need to develop that for each and every route that we build. We can do server-side sorting, create it at descending or ascending, and we can do server-side filtering. Completed, uncompleted, and since we're using the same type end-to-end from the front end to the backend, if I make a type error, TypeScript will let me know. It will keep me safe, protecting me for myself. And if I'll say undefined here, it will actually not filter anything. And one more thing is that you can see that it's all just simple REST API calls, standard REST API calls. So you can consume it from any other tool if you need to. You don't have to be bound to the end-to-end JavaScript. The next thing I want to do is implement the CRUD functionality. So let's go ahead and do that. To add a new task, I'll simply do await task repo, insert. And I no longer need these. To save changes to a task, I will do await task repo, save. And to delete a task, I will do await task repo, delete. And that's what I need to do to have full CRUD capabilities. I can update a task, and we can see that we have put request being sent to the backend. I can delete a task, and we can see a delete request. Yes, don't minimize when I don't want to. I can see a delete request, and I can add a new task. We see a post request, and again, I can delete it. So just a few decorators and a few lines of code, I got a full stack CRUD capabilities with front-end query language that is computed on the backend, very effective, very efficient. Now, at this point in time, our users enjoy our application, and they actually gave it to a second user. And that second user started making changes, and user 1 did not see those changes. Okay? And of course, we all know that. The user needs to refresh in order to see those changes, but users don't like it. They say, hey, we're looking at the same page of data. Why can't we see the same thing? Or the question that I love is, if Google can do it, why can't you? And I think that's one of the key things about Remote is we didn't invent any wheels, we didn't cross any borders, we just took complicated things and made them easier and accessible. So to add live query functionality, all we need to do is in our use effect, instead of find, we'll say live query. Instead of then, we'll say subscribe. Subscribe gets an info object, and we can use it to apply changes to our tasks. And lastly, we'll return the result, so it will unsubscribe when the component unmounts. So now we can see this. And if we'll open the second tab, put it aside, and we can see that the changes reflect for both browsers. Okay? So the idea here is to take a complex concept and make it accessible and easy for developer. The underlying technology is not really relevant because we're using a plugin pattern. By default, for development, we use HTTP server events, but it can be replaced with a plugin for WebSockets, for Ably, for PubNub, any other framework you may want. Great. So the next thing we need to do is validation. Validation is, again, one of those concerns that I constantly get wrong or inconsistent. I do front-end validations that is different from my back-end validation and get differing error or vulnerabilities because of that. I think that it should be in our single source of truth. So let's head over to our task. And I just want to define it here so it will be easy to follow. So I'll add task and say that validate. If the task title length is greater than 2 or too short. And now let's try and add an empty task. We can see that we get the error now. Check out the network tab. This is front-end validation. There's no network calls being made to perform this validation. Now let's go ahead and bypass that and send a post request with an empty task. And we can see that the same validation code consistently run both on the front end and the back end. It also returns a well-structured error object that we can use to show the correct error next to the correct input in our form. Great. The next thing that comes to mind is that my user tells me, I don't want to check them one at a time. I want to have a loop that updates all the tasks in my UI. And usually when the user talks to me, he doesn't know backend or frontend. He just talks about functionality. And a lot of the times, I don't really care. So I just go here, head over to our setAllCompleted function, and say, for task of await task repo find, await task repo update the task with completed. And that's it. Now, I'll set all completed, and it works. At this point in time, I'm happy. My user is happy, but my boss, not so much. Because it looks down at the network tab and shows me, look, how many network calls are you making for this? What if you had 10,000 tasks? And that's one of the things that I really hated about web development, is that I need to have two different hats, Schrödinger hats. One for developing the front end, and if I need to move something to the back end, I'm using different frameworks, different style. I need to change the hats, and I really, really hated that. With Remalt, it's the same code. So I can go ahead here and simply copy this function, and I'll add on the shared folder a tasks controller. This is just for the sake of being organized. Yeah, it's not really mandatory. And I'll put it here, make it static, and I'll give it the backend method decorator. The backend method decorator tells Remalt that whenever you're about to run this code in the front end, don't make an API call to the backend and run it there. And note that I'm using the same repo here. So if previously the repo made HTTP calls to the backend, now that this code is running on the backend, it will make SQL calls to the SQL, or Mongo calls to Mongo, or whatever calls to whatever you're using. Let's just register that on the API. And in our front end, I simply replace this call with await task controller, set all completed, and completed. And now, if you look at the network tab, there's a single call to make this update. So the idea here is that we're using the same way to access data in the front end and the back end. We don't have to switch hats. And so the code can become mobile, can become one time on the front end, one time on the back end, and we can use it all around. So let's see what we've done. We've done setup, entities, paging, CRUD, live query validation. The next thing we need to talk about is database. So far we've used our JSON database, which has served us very well, and it's a lot of fun for development. But now we are getting ready to move up to the cloud, and it makes sense to replace it with a proper database. So let's go and do that. I'm going to head over to our index. I'm going to import Remalt Postgres. And I'm going to tell Remalt that its data provider is a Postgres data provider with the connection strings that I've prepared in advance. And as soon as I do that, I don't have any tasks because my database doesn't have any tasks. And it actually has a cool utility that automatically creates the table for me. Of course, this can be disabled if you don't like it, but I really enjoy it for this demo. Let's go ahead and populate it with a few tasks. We're going to head over to our request, send, and now we have tasks that are coming from the database. The last important concern that I want to handle is called authentication and authorization. Pretty much any application needs this, and we keep writing it again and again in each and every application. And just like anything else, I want it to be in my single source of truth. So I'm going to head over to my task TS, and I'm simply going to say here that CRUD operations are only allowed for users that are authenticated. And as soon as I do that, I cannot see the data anymore because I'm not authenticated. Now, when authentication is an external concern, there's a lot of great tools around it. There's Clerk, there's NextAuth, there's Passport, all sorts of tools to handle authentication. For this demo, I'm going to use cookie session just for the sake of simplicity. And so I'm going to head over here, and I'm going to add cookie session. And let's review it. I configure the cookie session. I've added a few static list of users and standard express outs to sign in and sign out. Now, of course, I could have done this with backend methods like I've done before, but I want to use standard express routes to show you that Remult fits within your stack. You don't have to go and write a new project with Remult. You can add Remult to your existing project with your existing routes and start benefiting from it right now. And the next thing I'm going to do is I need to tell Remult how does it recognize the user. So I'm going to tell Remult get user from the request, get it from the session, the user. Great. Now on the front end, I'm going to change up to off. So now if I'm going to sign in with Steve, I'll be able to see the data. But that's not enough. Not all users were being created equal. We need to sometimes control the roles. So let's head over to our task TS and say that delete is not allowed for anyone, and insert is only allowed for admin. So now if Steve tries to add a new row, he will get a forbidden arrow. Okay, so we can have a fine-grained control of operations and visibility of fields and data. So let's go ahead and nominate, since it's the International Women's Day, let's nominate Jane as an admin. So I'll sign out, sign in as Jane, and see that Jane can add a comment. Great. But if I sign in as Steve, Steve gets a poor user experience. Okay, he gets a forbidden arrow. We don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and adjust the UI. Now I want to connect the UI to the same single source of truth definition. So I'll do it like this. I'm going to say task repo, metadata, only if insert is allowed, only then show the form. So now Steve cannot see the form anymore. And if I'll head over to our single source of truth, comment this out, Steve will see the form. And if I'll comment it back in, Steve will not be able to see the form. So I can get a consistent control of authorization between my API and my front end. Okay, so we've done pretty much everything that I've planned. Do you want to see this deployed? Okay, so let's go ahead and prepare this for deployment. This works half the time, so I need you to be patient with me. So in order to deploy it, the first thing we need to do is to tell it that the connection string will come from a database URL environment variable. And we'll also ask the Node.js server to return the static files that are created by Vite when Vite builds. Now, you can deploy this to any cloud provider that you want, but for the sake of this demo, I'm going to deploy it to Railway. How many of you know Railway? OK. I'll explain in a second while it works, what exactly it is. So I'm going to tell it to define a project with a random project name. And I'm going to open its UI. I'll then ask it to define for me a Postgres database and an empty service. And in my empty service, I'm going to find an environment variable, which is going to be the database URL we've defined a second ago. I'll deploy it and wait for it for a second and ask it for define for us a domain. Great. Now, the last thing I'm going to do Railway app. So what is Railway? Railway is a platform as a service provider that allows me to upload source code to it and run it. I don't need to worry about maintaining virus updates or whatever. They maintain the database for me, they maintain the application for me, and I just can get it to work, just like Heroku or Vercel or Render or Fly.io. And that's what's fun to use for this demo. Now, while it uploads, I'm going to give you a few more slides. So Remult can work with anything. Okay, you can use it with any front-end framework, React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, Quick, Solid, whatever you like. It works with any backend. It's just a partial list. Express, Festify, Nest, Next, Dino, Hono, Happy, Koa, pretty much all. You can work with any database with it. We provide you with a built-in implementation for Postgres, MySQL, Mongo, SQLite, SQL Server, and Oracle DB. But of course, you can create adapters for everything. And it can run on any Node.js runtime or even BAN, which means you can run it on either AWS or Google or managed services such as Heroku or Railway or Fly.io, etc. And there's a lot more features that I didn't have time to show you here. By the same entity definition, you can just as easily expose GraphQL API as you do REST API, and you get all the functionality with GraphQL. You can also expose OpenAPI and Swagger for documentation and for consumption by other services. There's a lot of lifecycle hooks when you have control about how things are being saved and how things are being read and deleted from the database. There's relationship between entities. There are fields that can only be updated on the backend or only visible on the backend. And if you don't like decorators, that's okay. There's decorator-less support. And if you don't like TypeScript and prefer to use JavaScript, you are welcome to do so too. I invite you to visit our website, rimal.dev, where we have tutorials on how to do everything that I've done here slowly and coherently within about an hour. In our YouTube channel, we have that also in videos with React, Angular, Vue, Next, and Svelte. Okay, and I invite you to join our Discord channel and converse with us, discourse with us. We are very attentive and very enjoy communicating. Now let's go back and see if the deployment has completed. So we're heading off to Railway, and we're going to open it. We're going to give it a second. It usually takes it a minute or two to open. And this really challenges my confidence in cloud deployment live. So one of the fun things with Railway is we can actually check out the deployment logs and see what's going on. So we can see the logs here. We can see that it was deployed successfully. We can see that it actually created the entity on the server as well. And now it will work. Yes! Whew, that was challenging. Perfect. So this time, I want you all to help me do a Q&A for this. So I'm going to sign in as Jane, and I'm going to say, give Rimal a star, because, we live on stars. And then I'm going to create a QR code, and I'm going to ask you all to test with me if this actually works. So go ahead, open this QR code, sign in as Jane, and let's see if you can write cool things that will appear on the screen. If you don't mind, I'm going to take this opportunity to do a selfie with all of you. Yay. Yes. So as you can see, it works. Live updates with all you guys at the same time. So in 25 minutes, right, we were able to take a front-end app, turn it into a full-stack app with validation, authorization, authentication, live query, and thank you all. I had a lot of fun. So I think now would be a good time for questions.
Well, thank you. Please give him a round of applause. Like build and deploy. The guy has 2 questions already. But first, I want to know from you if you ever test yourself with how many words per minute you can write. Did you?
No, not in a while. Not in a while.
Do you want to test it live?
I'm not that confident right now.
Don't worry. We can check it later. But yeah, we were just guessing how many words per minute where you're at. And we are betting to between 120 and 130.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. I was shooting for 60. So 120 sounds great.
No. You are not that guy. You are not that. 60 means that you are just typing one letter by a letter. I don't know. Okay. Are you testing word per minute? Raise up. Yes, 1 people. Then the rest. You are not developer. What the fuck? You are laughing. Yeah.
Challenge accepted. Send me a link. I'll send you the result.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to monkey type and let's organize a challenge because. Let's say the most high score, if you go beyond 150, so you beat me, you will receive this T-shirt, like with the smell and everything, directly from stage. All right, so joke aside, I'm coming for you.
Wow, amazing! Finally, I have the spirit of Rails when you can create the whole business just in the weekend. But like my first question, like how do you manage migration? How does this thing works in your system?
Okay, so when you work with database migrations, by default we have a built-in engine that is considered to be safe, which means it will add entities and will add columns and will never remove anything. Okay, we'll never delete anything, we'll never harm your database. And then we have an article on our website with a very basic migration engines, and you can manage from code, which is the way I prefer to do things. You do like version 1, version 2, and it will make sure to upgrade and run with it and do all the operations. I've been using it successfully for a long time, and I strongly recommend it. Have any other questions? Yes, go ahead. In the meantime, I'm going to show you that there is a CRM demo that you can all go and look at the source code if you want. It's a CRM built with React and MUI, and this you can find it on our website.
And check also how many GitHub stars do you have now? Because
I think about 25K, but I would love
we
it
need
if
to
you all
raise
would
up.
contribute.
Please, guys, go to GitHub and start the repository.
This is the place.
So I want to thank you, first of all. That was really solid. And
Thank you.
what about testing? So you left the test out of the talk, I presume because of
course.
time?
There's only so much you can show in the talk. But it's really friendly for automatic testing. First of all, of course, we use unit testing to test the framework. We have close to 2,000 tests to test everything from end to end. We have like 93% coverage. But it's also very friendly for testing from your code, and I do a lot of tests with vtest. Because you can easily switch the database, so you can use your test on in-memory database, and then in production replace it with a Postgres database. So it's very test-friendly, and I use tests with it a lot.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No one? Yes. Sorry, I need to go to Mike before.
Thanks for the talk. And I've seen that deleting a line gives an empty error message.
In this demo, it gives an error message, yes, because I've forbidden it in the entity. If you remember in the demo, when I went, I have it here, yes. So I said delete is not allowed for anyone. If I wanted to allow it, I could say here true, and then you would be able to delete, or...
No, just the error message when you are not enabled to do it.
So the error message is part of the front-end code.
It is available
Yes.
on the front end, but the backend refuses.
Yes, I know, because I understand what you mean. So in this demo, I've only restricted the insert according to the roles. You are correct, I should have also done the same for delete. So I can take the delete button over here. Let's go for the delete button. And I can do the same. Task repo, metadata, metadata. Only if delete is allowed, only then show the delete button. Okay?
If I may ask, are you planning to reduce this boilerplate, I call this, about authorization? Because I see there is still a lot of code, where on the other places it is a lot reduced.
Okay, so the idea here is that the code over here for authorization is, I think, quite simple. Just the properties that you set in terms of what you are allowing or not. The sign-in, sign-out process that I've done here, it's not part of Rimal, so I'm using an external provider because there's so many great providers around it. So there's no point in me trying to solve the problems that already exist. So I'm showing this here with cookie session, and it took a little bit of code. I have a demo on my website with NextAuth that takes less code, but handles it a bit differently. And it really is an external concern for me. Okay, we have examples on how to do that, but Thank you.
Great talk, very
Thank
cool
you.
presentation. What about monitoring and monitoring of the application and tracing, all that annoying stuff that developer needs to do?
So you can add layers of monitoring and layers of logging on the data provider, on the request that comes in, and you can use also your based frameworks logging and monitoring capabilities. You can use Express or Festify, and both have great logging and monitoring capabilities. Actually, you reminded me of one of the things that I forgot to say. A lot of people ask, how does this scale, or how does this work well? Is it production ready or whatever? So obviously, this is used by hundreds of organizations writing applications with it. I personally have an application that I wrote that uses this to distribute food parcel from food banks to people in need. It currently distributes 450,000 deliveries a year. from a server, Heroku server that costs me $7 a month. Okay, so this scales pretty well and handles great traffic very well.
Last question.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions about databases. So how do you define indexes, and how do you deal, if you deal with those, with the stored procedures?
Okay, so about indexes, I consider that an external concern. I consider an index an optimization stage that I do with my database. So as part of the migrations that I run, that I explained earlier, I create the indexes that I need when I need them. Okay, so if there's something that performs not as well as I want it, I analyze it, get the right index, and add it as a migration step. That was question one. Question two, stored procedures. So, I call them, just like I call the backend method to set all completed, I can call a backend method to call a stored procedure and return the data. So that works perfectly well. Okay? Cool.
All right. So that was everything for the Q&A. Don't run away, because you will receive
I've been waiting for
the
this.
trophy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you again for the great talk and the great project. I hope you receive some, I don't know, maybe some stars on the repository. I hope so.
And I will, by the way, I'll put some stickers here if anyone wants. I have a lot of remote stickers, so I'll distribute them around. Thank you so much.
Grab those stickers.